Good morning and welcome to Exploring Glorantha. This is the show where we sit around and we talk about Greg Stafford and Chaosium's wonderful world of mythology and gods and cults, and today factions. Like this is the episode. But before I get into that, we're back 2024. Kind of a 2023 was rough on both of us, and so just glad to be back, glad to be here. Evan, glad to be here with you, sir.
Likewise. One of my favorite places to be.
Glorantha. I
With
have the
you.
well, yes. Hello, hey, it's Dream Shaper. Good to see you. Hopefully get to see you at Chaosium Con. I will be there this year. So we've been playing Exploring Glorantha
Musical chairs.
musical chairs.
Yeah.
So this year is my turn to go, and hopefully 2025 will be both of our years to go.
Yeah.
I started the musical chairs game, so this is in no way anything on Evan. But I will be there, and I don't know when I can make the announcement, but I may be speaking on a panel at Chaosium Con. So, ooh.
Exciting secret projects and all sorts of stuff going on.
I was actually looking, I have the big 6 poster map of Genertella on my wall. Evan knows. He's been here in the studio. This is where we do our TPK game. Briefly, I entertained running RuneQuest Adventures in Glorantha for the 12 people who show up here, and basically decided we would get through one strike rank of one combat before my head exploded. RuneQuest Glorantha, I run for small groups. What struck me is so they're all framed, they're all nice, they're all set up, and really it's like 1/4 of one of those maps is the focus of 98% of the Gloranthan content, right? You've got essentially glamour down through Balazar, Dragon Pass, Esrolia down as Notchet, and then over to Prax, and it's like just interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this episode is actually big thanks to a fan, Eric. Eric, if you are listening, watching, seeing this at some point in the future due to the asymmetrical nature of YouTube, thank you. So I got to meet Eric at Gamehole Con. We hung out for, maybe an hour, and we were talking about exploring Glorantha. And he's like, well, I really would love it if you would talk about factions in Glorantha, because it seems that when someone comes to Glorantha, we latch on to one of these factions, and it becomes part of the way that we interact and enjoy the world. I am very much pro Sartar, anti-lunar, and Evan is very much a lunar loving hypocrite. And good morning, by the way, to Praetorian Panzer. Good to see you, Chris. So, Evan, what were like? Let's kind of, why are we fascinated by this? And I mean, I have my own thoughts on this, but I want to turn the floor over to you to start.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so human beings are we're collective, sort of. We thrive in a in groups.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we see that even through today, even though we are far more individualistic, say, than a Bronze Age or even heroic Bronze Age kind of society, a fantasy Bronze Age that we have in Glorantha. The collective is what is important. We go down to the base of kinship. It's the family. It's the sort of extended family that goes out up to being a clan, then the tribe, and individuals are far less important than the sort of collective survival and the collective, the needs of the collective. This is why um, the um, the idea of that, things that are very normal for us, that we individually make choices, all sorts of choices about our lives, about what we're going to do, like what we would study, what career we would follow, what who we would pair up with, whether we have a relationship and or get into a committed relationship, a marriage, whatnot. These are individual choices, and we are very comfortable with that being
Mm-hmm.
the case in, certainly in Western society. Um, that is not really the case in that. That would be out of the norm for almost all the societies in Glorantha.
Well, and
Yeah,
out of the norm for almost all of the societies in human history, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, so the individual is both admirable and dangerous. Um, so there's sort of this safety in numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So we see in Glorantha different ways to organize, and of course we've talked a lot, and there's going to be a lot of discussion as the cults of RuneQuest come out, because
Yes.
one of the fundamental, universal uh, uh, organizers of individuals in Glorantha is the affiliation with some sort of um, religious faith, magical, spiritual tradition, um, and it cuts across a lot of these factions, of course, and sets up interesting dichotomies, that somebody who worships Orlanth, it doesn't mean you're buddies with everybody who worships Orlanth. If you're a worshiper of Orlanth from Sartar, but you are facing off with a bison tribesman from Prax, your interests are not aligned. Why is that? Because you're a Sartarite and they are a Praxian, and their allegiance is not just, you may have common views on honor
Mm-hmm.
and on the sort of structure of the cosmos, but your interests are driven by other things, these affiliations with um, other organizations, some of which, as a player, of course, you choose them, but the character does not choose, what family they're
Yeah.
born into, what clan
Or tribe.
and or tribe, or city that
Yeah.
the confederation that they're in, or even the kingdom or empire into which they're born, and they may define themselves in alignment or in opposition to it, but it is a defining characteristic. And then there are things that they do get to choose, maybe
Yeah.
secret societies, guilds, maybe, although again, like a guild affiliation, you oftentimes take on the training of your family. Your family are redsmiths or are horse breeders, and that's what you are
Yeah.
from so
Well, and I think what's like a another analog for something like this is I'm rereading through the Wheel of Time, and the Aiel, right?
mhm,
They have their clans, but they also have their societies, and you
yeah,
see sometimes the society takes precedence in the person's honor, sometimes the clan takes precedence, and that's kind of what's going on here in Glorantha. And
yeah,
what I loved, I mean, the reason I fell in love with this world is that because of the factions, because of this very tribalistic mindset, because right, we've often joked that D&D is a game where you play kind of itinerant wanderers who roll into an area and try and solve problems, and they roll out and go to the next area. Whereas in Glorantha, you play, a bunch of cowherders and farmers who have to take up the life of the adventure really to defend their land and their people. And in every RuneQuest Glorantha game I've run, I've made it very clear from the start your individual character does not matter. And actually, I think the rules of RuneQuest sort of reinforce this in the fact that it is so easy to die in RuneQuest, but your clan, right? If you look at how you make I'm going to say mechanically reinforced in the
Mm-hmm.
newest adventure or newest edition, if you look at how long it takes to make a character, the lion's share of what you are doing is setting up your character's family so that if that character dies, their brother, their sister, their cousin, you have this backstory of, hey, here's what it means to be a member of this family. Here's the newest person that I'm putting, here at the end, because the story of the family and the clan is really what's important in a campaign of RuneQuest.
Yeah.
And if you're like me and you go back to you start character creation with the hero quest, clan creation questionnaire, um, there's a lot of subtle alliteration there that almost caused me. It was a little bit of a tongue twister. Uh, that's what I mean. Even more so than the lion's share of the first session is actually making the clan, and then the second session we make our characters' families, and then we make our individuals. And so that's from the start. Glorantha has been a setting that is deeply tied into factions, tribes, cults. I think the only analog is really the very earliest days of Dungeons and Dragons when alignment was not a list of do's and don'ts or philosophies, but was what side, what faction of reality do you align yourself with? Are you, following law? Are you following chaos? Are you following neutrality? And that sort of quickly falls by the wayside. Whereas over the years, Glorantha has just dug deeper and deeper into this. The other thing is, I had a professor who always referred to humans not as Homo sapiens, but Homo liturgicus. Uh, we are beings who do things. There is a pattern, a ritualistic pattern of our lives, and even if you're not religious, we can see that in our modern society with people who have their rites and rituals about how and how they watch and what they wear for their favorite sports teams or political affiliations, or any sort of um, we as humans want to fall, and we have this natural tendency to fall into this pattern of liturgy or practice. And so I think, and we're going to go through the factions, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the wrap up, but not to bury the lead. I think the reason that when someone comes to Glorantha and develops really strong feelings for this is the right way, this is the true way, this is the good guys, and those guys are wrong, it's because Glorantha is a very human setting. And so it acknowledges the fact that these things really, truly, deeply exist and are ingrained into the fabric of society, like fractally, from the individual all the way up to the way reality works. This always kind of travels up and down. And I'm not saying other fantasy worlds don't do that, but even as a guy who has created multiple fantasy worlds, that's a hard thing to accomplish, right? You have to be very purposeful. You have to be very. I think purposeful is the way I'm looking for it. Otherwise, your layers feel like layers, and well, I don't really care about the gods unless I'm playing a divine spellcaster at some point, and in that case, I really just care about my god and not really anything else about it. And it can. Whereas, I mean, Glorantha, we're getting a massive series of books just on the cult factions so that players can dig in and really embody their character in this world.
Yeah. And I've two things that occurred to me. One from listening to a recent episode of our good friends Ludo and Jorg's
The God
God
Learners,
Learners
yes.
podcast, and they were interviewing uh, about a recent Johnstown Companion publication, Furthest,
Mm.
the Jewel of Lunar Tarsh. And one of a faction that is not covered in the outline, but another thing, that they were just talking about, random encounters, because there are gladiatorial games in Furthest, and of course there are fans of different kinds of
Mm-hmm.
gladiators, and so they have a random chart of you can encounter a group of rowdy fans, and which kind of gladiator is their favorite, and which kind of gladiator is the one that they always want to lose. And so again, that's like, on the one hand, the idea of a blood sport like that is very divorced from us. We have sanitized that to a certain extent. On the other hand, this idea of like sports fandom, associated with cities, the rise of
Oh yeah.
urbanism, etc. The kind of deadly rivalry, say in Constantinople, between
The
the
charioteers.
blues and
Yes.
red
Yeah.
charioteers and things like that, and riots in the street. Um, and this is very deep. It goes back
Yes. Gladiator
um,
hooligans. Praetorian.
100%, 100%. Um, and so, this is a touchstone for us. It unlocks a little bit of this idea. And then another thing that I wanted to mention is, of course, this collectivism, this focus on family, the collective survival of society is more important than the individual. At some point, there's a tipping point, potentially, with the hero path, though,
Mm-hmm.
in that the hero sometimes very much strikes out that it is the innovator, or even a very sort of selfish. There is a path that can be very selfish. If we look at one of the most powerful, dangerous individuals of the third age, Harak the Berserk, I mean, his path to herodom ends with the enslavement of his people's god
Yeah.
for his own personal power. He is an incredible individual, and yet he's also sort of betrayed and destroyed a significant part of his society. I think it's very notable. He becomes the head of the wolf pirates. Those become his new people as an individual, because he sort of betrayed his original the bear people, that they don't follow him.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting. So you have to. So at some point, uh, the deep play here in Glorantha is that the identification with these factions, with different the different identities that are developed through society: cult, clan, tribe, city, secret society, or warrior society, or guild. And then at some point, there's the temptation to break with those in some way,
Mm-hmm.
for on the quest for a more individual authority, power. um, Obviously, Arcat,
Yeah.
whom we've spoken about a lot, um, is thought of in some lights as having uh, uh, betrayed repeatedly his sort of adopted identities, um, and he needed to do that in order to become as powerful as he did. Um, and yet we also have like Harmast, who sort of he doubled down sort of on being Orlanthi. I think
Yeah.
he was like the most Orlanthi of them, and but even he made these. He's the one who brought Arcat back from hell. He brought Taylor back from hell. Um, not exactly those were that turned out to be the things that were needed, but it's not exactly the ideal of he didn't find some ancient Orlanthi hero to help out. So
Yeah.
there are these tensions
Yes.
that are down the line. Um, and I think are interesting to consider as we look at these kinds of connections, and what kind of hero are you on the path to being, and we find out through the play, which is
Yes.
the great thing about playing in Glorantha, and that's why we love talking about it, but we encourage most to develop the story at the table.
Yes, 100%. And that's kind of the difference between an outlaw and a hero is really the measure of success at the end of the day. So, excuse me. Uh, when we're looking at Glorantha, a helpful thing for me is always to invert the pyramid, as kind of I've explained to my players. In modern society, the individual we have put kind of at the top of most important. And then you kind of have your friends and family, maybe extended friends and family in your city, and maybe, we identify with, um, what previous nationality we were before we moved to wherever we're at. And then maybe, a larger, kind of tiering down. And each of those levels is there's a degree of separation on each of those levels. But in the Bronze Age, we need to flip that over. Like the individual is almost at the bottom of the importance. And this idea that in the Bronze Age, safety in numbers and only through community can we survive. Each individual is just contributing to the next tier up, which is kind of even more important. So, above the individual, they're immediately members of a family. And in Glorantha, family doesn't mean kind of the modern nuclear family that we have come to understand. We're talking like in the Bronze Age, that would be everyone who you're related to who hasn't married off into somebody else's family living in the same possibly house, but also at least, the same block of houses nearby. And those families are then joined together in a group of called a clan. That clan is a group of extended families, and this thing that I love about Glorantha, this attention to detail, clans form a group of clans form a tribe. And that's probably the biggest political unit that most people within the the world are actually interacting with. Yes, there are multiple tribes that form, like Sartar, but for most not non-adventurers, right, your tribe is probably really the largest affiliation you're ever, excuse me, really thinking about. But clans are put on a rotation, if that makes sense. Certain clans can marry into other clans, and certain clans can marry into your clan, but still it's not willy-nilly. It's not like, well, I happen to like this person, because even in Bronze Age, we kind of knew that, cousins marrying is not a genetically viable long-term solution. And so the tribal structure dictates to the clans, hey, here's where your land is, here's who you can raid, here's who you can marry into and who can marry into you. And that structure is then superimposed on the families beneath. The clans have kind of the same authority, and then from the that authority then and so I use the term fractal because it is right. What we see at the macro level just continues down on every level all the way down to the individual, and then kind of snaking its way, as Evan said, kind of through the entire level of reality, from the gods down to the individual adventurer, are the cults. And in some ways, the cults are these very intensely personal choices that the character gets to make. And Evan, like for me at least, the cult is probably the most important individualistic choice that someone can make. It's an intensely personal, intensely individualistic. Now granted, you may not be able to initiate an cult. They can say no, right? Cults have standards.
I do.
Good. Hey, Becca, good to see you as well. So, Evan, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, from a player point of view, definitely you're making this individualistic choice. But I think, again, looking through it, from the other side, even in cult choice, we know if we look, we don't yet have sort of the Sartar pack is not out, but it's coming maybe this year. I know they've been
That's
working on it really hard, and
this year. This year,
yeah.
later this year is has been the mantra of Chaosium since 1978.
Yeah. And Jeff has put a lot on the RuneQuest Facebook site explaining things. The it's it's an individualistic choice for the player, but there's an enormous amount of conformity on the side. Out in the out in the out in the clans and tribes and stuff, like most of the women are Inalda and
Yeah.
most of the men are some form of Orlanth, usually Orlanth Thunderous, because that's what farmers do. And so the smaller specialized cults are themselves sort of,
Further standard deviations out. Yeah.
yes, exactly. And um, but there's a conformity and expectation of their, how what they're going to do. And the adventurer path is the really unusual. uh Everyone understands from the structure of myth, they know that there are some who have to go out, but they the and face danger to go out
Mm-hmm.
into the wilds. But that's dangerous, and um, and it's not always an unalloyed good. The cycle of Orlanth myths, which are what we focus on in the sort of Dragon Pass, and sort of the 1/6 or one uh, you know small portion of the world that we are have the most understanding about, shows that going out and adventuring, having adventures the way Orlanth did, often results in things not working out quite how they should. It
Yeah.
does also give you a path to go out and fix those things. Try, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Um, but so my thoughts are that um, it's helpful to understand that the choice of cult. I really appreciate the cults of RuneQuest coming out and really explaining, what what is the role in general of this cult in society. There's a lot of cults in there that are not good adventuring cults, because that's not what the cult's purpose generally is. It's to have a function in society,
Yeah.
to make to make social relations work, to make the relationship with the natural world or the spiritual world work, again, for the collective, for the family, the tribe, the city, etc., in order for it to survive. So we're not going to have a lot of folks that are saying, "Hey, I'm going to be a Flamal initiate." It's like, great, you can grow grain and stuff, but what's going to happen if we get attacked by bandits? And um,
Yeah. And like
but
adventurers
yeah,
are the player characters are the 1% of people who are falling into
exactly.
like the second and third standard deviation away from norm. There's a
Yeah.
great cult by cult distribution by research by region chart
Mm.
in one of the books. Um, I'll put that in the show notes. That is really helpful to say, hey, like in this region, here's what most people are. And I like that because it does help. I mean, the cults are also a great shorthand for what is the predominant beliefs and the way people are going to interact with you in
Right.
this region.
Right. If for some reason there's a lot of storm bulls there, you're like, oh, that's a That's a volatile and dangerous area.
Yeah.
And if it's a lot of barn tar and they just
Poor
want to,
Barntar always gets the short shrift in my games
no,
for some
I,
reason. I love Barntar.
this is what most people want,
Yeah.
to work on their farm, to have a good crop, to have a large, loving family, that is safe and survives. I mean, that's winning.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's, yeah, I think that idea, I can't remember if that's maybe the mythology
I
book
think
that
it might
has
be the
those charts.
mythology book or the
That,
Prosopadia,
again,
one of the earlier ones.
yeah.
I think it's the mythology book.
And I think that is an excellent shorthand, again, like sort of to get the temperature of the region, and but with an understanding that, like, most places, it's not filled with adventurers. it's a it's and if you do have a place that looks like, well, everybody here worships Orlanth, Humach, Stormbull, like, that's a dangerous place. That's going to be a scary potential place,
Yeah,
because
or Kaigalatour or
right, right,
um, the Gores, Moran
yes,
Gore and Babista
right,
Gore. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So we kind of covered what are the main things in Sartorite, and the outline for patrons this month is going to be stellar. Evan has put together a great reference on factions and tribes and clans and references for what books you can look this up more in detail. It's just one of the benefits of being a member of the iconic patronage. Plug. Uh, so we kind of talked about that in depth. Let's talk about some other major factions that you could be a part of. We Evan, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Telmori?
yeah. So the Talmori are, they're referred to as a tribe in Sartar. So let's cabin this as, Telmori in Sartar, because Telmori actually appear throughout
Mm-hmm.
uh, different areas of Genertella, often as a hidden people. Um, and we've talked about them in relationship to the first age and their fight. They joining Gabaji's side. They were followers of Nice Lore and everything. But anyway, one of the factions, one of the scattered groups, ends up in Dragon Pass, and they they were brought into the Union of Sartar by the hero Sartar, and made officially one of the tribes of Sartar. But they are not an Orlanthi people; they are a Sunshin people. That is, that um, they are a people that live with a totemic animal,
Mm-hmm.
and they see that totemic animal. They don't see a difference between themselves and that totemic animal.
Yeah.
They're just different versions of the same creature. They are human wolves. That is what they see as themselves, and that wolves are just are just an extension of their people. And the complicated thing is, of course, because of their association in the first age with Nisel or Gabaji, they were given a gift of, ritually, they were able to turn themselves into wolves through their spiritual practices, but they were given the gift of being able to do that at will. But then it turned out, it was revealed that this was in fact a taint from chaos, and then they were cursed by Taylor the Laughing Warrior, to be forced to turn into their wolf form on Wild Day. So they are very dangerous people. They become ravening monsters once a week,
Yeah.
and so they're not real popular with their Orlanthi neighbors, but they were brought into the Union, and given a territory, and they made certain concessions. They don't just keep to their lands, but they don't attack their neighbors, and they don't take their neighbors' livestock the way they used to when they first moved into the pass when it was being resettled after the dragon kill. Um, so they have a completely different structure that is influenced by their animal totem. They consider themselves the family structure is the pack structure, and they have alphas and that lead them, and then occasionally they will gather into larger and larger packs, and they did have sort of a super pack leader, a king, um, and in fact the sort of critical time for whether or not there would be further conflict or sort of bringing them into the union that Sartar was building was when Hauberk John of Johnstown killed the Telmori king. And in order to make peace, Sartar produced a new king, someone that they'd never seen before, and who had 4 wolves. Now, of course, they bond with a single wolf brother or sister typically, but he had 4, and because of this miracle, they made peace. They recognized Sartar for his sort of miraculous ability to create harmony, and so they become this this accepted part, but they are outside, they are way outside the standard deviation of what is expected in our Orlanthi society. And they have this totemic spiritual tradition, which is very much focused just on their ancestors, the great ancestor Telmor the wolf. And so the structure is totally different, and because of the practicalities of how they live, they are hunter foragers who turn into wolves once a week.
Yeah.
So a lot of material culture is not very useful. You travel around following game, etc., and you don't build a lot of permanent shelters. You don't carry a lot of things that that are you're going to drop somewhere when you turn into a wolf. You have very basic things, and how to make everything that you need. So they're at a different level of technological development in many ways out of necessity. Now, of course, they trade with their neighbors. There are prestige items that would be kept safe, like bronze items and things of that nature. So, and this is not an unusual, sort of situation in the real world kind of Bronze Age, that there would be contact with cultures that, don't become just because you have contact with a different kind of culture that's at a different kind of technological level doesn't mean, oh, well, we'll just give up our ways and we'll just become like you.
Yeah.
One, because the one culture may not accept them, and the other is because you don't just give up your identity easily. This is what tells you how the world works. And so there's exchange, there's conflict, but the Telmori, at least as they have survived into the Third Age, are not now city builders. They're not. They are they're survivors.
Yeah.
And so it's a very different sort of experience, and there's different instances of them sort of throughout Genertella that have different have a little bit different interaction with neighbors. There's a big group of them in Duraster. There are scattered tribes of them in Rallios. They are supposed to have disappeared from Frenella, but did they?
Yeah.
So yeah, this is something that is a completely different. Not only is their religious practice different, so a they are they are contemplated, of course, in the myth cycles of Orlanth, but not particularly as friends. Um, and their family structure and their social structure and their material culture are all very, very distinct. Now, there's a lot of information which I didn't mention in the outline, and I'll just say it here because the items are unfortunately out of print, but there's a lot of Telmori um, uh, matters discovered or discussed in the Red Cow sequence in that were
Yes.
Hero Quest, now
Quest worlds.
Quest Worlds,
Yep.
And that information was published by Moon Design in the pre-merger, pre-rebirth of RuneQuest. But if you run across those, you might have
They're
more
wonderful.
information that would
Yeah.
be give you even a greater sense of sort of the relationship and the place. Of course, the setting is sort of pre-Dragon Rise, but and I guess the last thing I would say is that, of course, during the lunar occupation, there was sort of a deterioration of relationships between with the princedom really weakened, if not completely destroyed. The sort of peace between the tribes, we saw that from the duck hunt to all sorts of feuding, etc. Well, that extended, of course, to the Telmori too, to the point of them essentially annihilating one of their neighboring Orlanthi tribes, um, and then being punished and being occupied by the Lunars, and so there's a lot to unpack
Yeah.
for if you're gonna um, either play a Telmori pack, which would be a very different experience, or play someone who's a lone wolf, who's left the Telmori lands and is now on the adventuring path because they've kind of lost all of their family and they're finding maybe a new pack.
Yeah. Well, and then kind of spinning out of that, you have all of the different tribes in Prax, and you can go check out our Praxian episode because we cover those in detail. But I want to kind of cover some of the other factions that you can dive into, especially in the newest versions of RuneQuest. The baboon troop, which is a non-human troop in Prax. We had a couple of baboons in my last RuneQuest game. The Bosmoli Berserkers, the Bolo Lizard people, the Cannibal Cult. It's kind of tough one to chew,
not
but
not recommended for
yeah. The
good villains.
Agamori, the Men and a Half, which
Yeah.
are these more than human hunters who exist on the plains. Then you have the Zebra Riders, the Rhino Riders. A lot of these I'm like, oh no, I know these guys from the Con of Cons card game. I was teaching Zane.
Absolutely.
The Sundome Templars, which I have a lot of love for. They were in Borderlands, right?
And really Sun County
Mm-hmm.
in the RQ3, okay, that Mob's first major publication, and that really sort of kicked off the 90s RuneQuest
Renaissance.
renaissance.
Yeah.
Yeah, a the Sundomers, and I think we're going to have sort of a new interest in the Sundome, because of course there is a Sun County in Dragon Pass as well,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that will probably be covered in the Sardar box, and so really expand our view of Yamalio as not only as an interesting adventuring cult, but as a cult that an entire society is built around. Um, but and these sundomes, pop up in various places. They were sort of built in uh, across the continent. Again, spanning And so that's the cult dimension, but also the sun dome is not just, it's because there are worshipers of forms of Vimalio that don't necessarily cluster around the sun dome, but the sun dome temples are uh, are the center of a particular
Mm-hmm.
kind of society with a particular kind of structure that comes down, from the mythic age of this is the kind of way that you need to live in order to survive and to endure all of the hardships of living.
Yeah.
This is how we defend ourselves. This is how we discipline ourselves in order to um, make sure that we reproduce society in each generation and have the fortitude and endurance and wealth and nutrition, everything that you need to reproduce society in a way that has lasted since the time of the gods,
Yeah.
and will, the gods willing, continue to reproduce itself going forward. And so
And that's a really interesting point
yeah,
because we sometimes take that for granted in the modern world, right?
yeah,
In Glorantha, the traditions and structures that are set up is to ensure that the way of life that has been enjoyed will continue to be enjoyed and
yeah,
continue on. Because it's not a guarantee, right?
yeah,
All of this stuff we're talking about with Sartar, we haven't even got there in our, temporal look at Glorantha. We're going to be going back into the second age next month,
right,
and we're still, hundreds of years away from the third age.
yeah. And if you think about it, there were huge, important, influential ways of life during the second age, which we'll go into detail, and their ruins,
Mm-hmm.
abandoned ruins, dot the landscape
Yeah,
because they're gone,
they're gone.
because they something happened, and it was not the path they chose was not sustainable.
Well, and there's
And
it's also sort of implied in King of Sartar that even the stuff in the third age, right, is being uncovered by archaeologists in the fourth
yeah,
age, and that everything that
right,
we know doesn't really survive the hero wars in a recognizable fashion. The world
yeah,
does,
yeah.
but
Well, and that is, the question of, what does the hero wars, what do the hero wars lead to, is a big question. And of course, your Glorantha will vary.
yep.
And what is being recorded in King of Sartar, we already know is that it is a collection of unreliable
Mm-hmm.
documents that give us a lot of information, but some of it's contradictory, etc. It can't necessarily all be true, can it? Or can it? And there is some way to reconcile it. But so this idea that um, the uh, the way that people live in the third age is passed down from a certain point of view from the time of at least the gray age before time, and then through the first and second ages. But but only God time is unchanging.
Right.
And so there have been changes and innovations, and it's very likely that a first age Orlanthi might not recognize a lot of things that even if they were from Dragon Pass, and they walked into a Sardarite city and they would say, "What is this?"
Yeah.
So there, uh, the idea of, there is this social reproduction, this importance
Mm-hmm.
of in family and in all the structures that we're talking about, and yet almost like we see, in biology, DNA, there is mutation
Well,
and there's drift and change. And even if you think, I think fervently your character would believe. I am living the way that Orlanth, for example, has decreed for us to live, and
From the start of time.
decreed from the beginning of time.
Yeah.
And yet, and that's true, and yet it's also maybe entirely distinct from the way things were earlier. And
Yeah.
so then, as you're creating your ancient ruins and your lost past civilizations that your adventurers might be delving into, um, exploring some of those differences, and
Mm-hmm.
exercising your creativity so that your Glorantha varies, may be a very fertile place to explore
Ooh, you almost said the
how
name of the show in the. I know,
yes.
almost. We were so close.
In Glorantha.
In,
And again, like, exploring the origins of different organizations. Maybe you have a warrior society, or a secret magical tradition or something, and either rediscovering it in the past. We know that Argrath is delving into dragon magics that almost certainly come from the Second Age. And we know that the Lunar Empire has been digging up all sorts of different things and reincorporating them,
including
including,
goddesses. Yeah.
their right, including starting with their goddess.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and so, and then sort of fitting it in to the world, making room for it, so that and we started on the Sundome Templars, but let's not forget some of these other little organizations that managed to survive out on the plains of Prax, in between the great
Mm-hmm.
tribes. The baboons are fun because, well, they're monkeys,
Yeah.
but
No, I mean,
they're human size, basically human intelligence monkeys, but they have a completely different perspective.
mm-hmm.
They don't organize that, although of course they tell the story of once there was a great monkey kingdom, etc., and they ruled everywhere, and of course they were, somebody betrayed them, or some terrible thing happened, and now they're just scattered troops of sort of extended families that probably don't rise quite to the level, sort of family and troop, which is a troop as big as a clan, probably
We
not,
don't know.
probably
Yeah, because their
smaller.
population
Yeah,
is smaller.
right.
If I may interject, because we got
Sure.
so much. I mean, we've got the
I know.
cities and the guilds, and we have
Yeah.
the political alliances and Notchit and Isrolia. There's so much good stuff in here, but we've got about we're wrapping, getting close to our hour, and what I wanted to say,
Yeah.
let's kind of bring it back and say, as a player, let's start broader. As a lover of
Okay.
Glorantha, why do you think this sort of factionalization, both in the setting and frankly of the fan base to a degree,
Yeah.
is so important?
Yeah.
And
I mean, it tells us to a certain extent who we are and who
Mhm.
our characters are. Like, you get to sort of tick the box, and even if, like, you don't sign up, like I'm I'm Team Orlanth, but I'm like team,
Are you though?
but I'm different. But I'm a different Orlanthe because I, you're defining yourself either in alignment or in opposition to, I'm an out of the ordinary or Orlanth, or Orlanth has so many sort of masks,
Yeah, and
yeah,
facets.
facets that allows you a lot of freedom to sort of, I'm not like the upright farmer Orlanthe. I'm the sneak around and steal stuff and defeat my enemies by trickery kind of Orlanthe. You pick a team And then, you got your team colors, you got your team cheer, you got, it helps inform you in a way, because Glorantha is so rich, it really helps you define the character and give you a deep sense of the play from the get-go. um you know I am a bison rider. It's like, okay, I'm out on the plains, and we live in a nomadic life. We are in competition. Our competitors are the other riders out there,
Mm-hmm.
but we'll all come together to fight the horse riders, because we don't like, the who's on the inside and who's on the outside. And again, as you say, the fractals, like, you know fractal is a good description for the planes of Prax, because on the one hand, you have the clan of a particular animal rider,
Mm-hmm.
and they may even fight against other clans. They have rivalries, etc. But then, in opposition to the next tribe over, they all come together. And then there's the outsiders, and the Praxians will typically unite against them. They united to fight the Lunars. Worked out the first time pretty well, not so well the second invasion. But now the Lunars are at bay. And so I think the why we like these things is because they help us sort of align with these larger concepts
Mm-hmm.
of how we see the characters, and see the kinds of themes that we like. The Orlanthi uh, affiliation tends to be more of um, encourage a certain
Mm-hmm.
level of individualism. Nobody can make you do anything. Violence is always an option. There is always another
Yeah.
way. But for adventuring, that sort of individualistic warrior culture is attractive. On the lunar side, I mean, we're about to get the lunar book next month,
Hopefully.
um, for to describe the cults. And there are a lot of great Johnstown Compendium
Mm-hmm.
books that talk about the empire and the provinces. Um, and that's a different, that's the more civilized, like organized. We don't spend our time raiding cattle from our neighbors, out in the boonies. We are oriented towards cities, towards high culture, towards organization, towards um,
Enlightenment,
towards you know,
illumination.
illumination. Yes, that it's a, I don't want to call it evangelical exactly, but there is a an offer of greater insight, that the we are all us ethos of the empire. There's a light side and a dark side to it, certainly, but it doesn't matter where you're from or who you are. You can be liberated from the structures of your clan, tribe, family, of your society. You can be freed to realize more of your potential, and by joining the empire, by joining the lunar way, there is this hope to move towards more peace, more prosperity, um, more, and more strength through the unity. And they the most peaceful, safe, wealthy place in central Genertella is the Lunar Empire.
Yeah.
I mean, so that sense of,
So you
I would
say.
want to. So, well,
No.
Jeff said. Um, so um, so that sense of like, hey, yeah, it's great to be the scrappy barbarians fighting and stuff, but where we'd really, as modern people,
Where we would be
we would feel
most
more
comfortable.
comfortable. It's like, living in the Persian Empire, living in Rome, or
Mm-hmm.
in the Roman, one of the Roman cities. There is, you know, more safety, order, um, and material wealth. All of those things are sort of a comfort, and so you pick that side because um, it also tells you something about what kind of character you are, and I think you often get the lunars out on the frontier. They are defining themselves maybe in opposition, like it's great, and but I can't live there, but I espouse their ideals, and expanding them is a net good for the world.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be out here, living in the liminal space, fighting the forces of sort of destruction and ignorance, etc. It is a very interesting story to tell.
Yeah.
So
Well, and from the GM perspective, what I love most about this is one, you can get, if you identify what factions your players are associating with, you can get visceral responses out of them
oh
by
yeah,
putting the stereotypical opponent in front of them.
oh
And
yeah,
then if you want to play against type, you can really lean into, well, hey, this, you know, it's very easy to hate from afar. It's much more difficult to hate up close and personal. And
yeah,
so if your players hate the lunars, give them lunar enemies and then introduce a very lunar priestess who is, they end up begrudgingly liking despite the fact that she's very much a lunar through and through and unapologetic about it. The other thing is it provides a lot of tension for you to use. Becca's still in the chat going, "No, I don't like Octalia." Um, it provides immediate tensions, which makes tensions are where we get the best adventure
yeah,
ideas from. If you're running a game in Prax and you have, the Bison Riders, well, the Bison Riders have traditional enemies. If you're playing in Sartar, like the first, for my probably the best RuneQuest game I've ever run, the very first adventure was about the clan rivalry between the Stone Haters and their neighbors, and a cattle raid that went bad. Even the fact that they're called the Stone Haters, they hated dwarves. And so anytime I threw anything dwarven in there, the players were intrigued, but they knew their characters were going to want to get involved and stop whatever was going on. And so I think it adds a very personal layer of tension and drama to your adventures if you
yeah,
remember the factions. You don't have to remember all of the factions. A
yeah,
simple cheat sheet of, hey, here are my players. And actually, it's even easier than that because mechanically, this is reinforced with your passions. And so, what do your characters what do your characters literally have love of written down on their character sheet? What do they have, hatred of? What do they have duty to? All right, those three things you could just focus your entire campaign on that tight group of love, hate, and duty, and you've got an entire campaign just ready to unfold in front of you.
yeah, yeah. Exactly. Those are the levers you want to be pulling,
Mm-hmm.
and and um, and the drama, that we see. The passions can go up and down.
Yeah,
Like you can get more and more devoted to your family, or making difficult decisions, particularly when you're playing, one love or duty off of another. Like like one's going to win and one might lose. It
yeah,
might
and so
go
there one will
might go
go up and
down.
one will go down. Yeah,
Right. So, and that's exciting play. That's memorable.
yeah,
And when these factions, these organizations are motivating, that makes them feel really real and influential at the table.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Exploring Glorantha. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Eric, thank you for such a great question. If you got questions you would like to see us explore, shoot us an email, put it in the Discord. We'll slot it into the schedule. And next month, as I said, we're going back to our temporal look at Glorantha. We're going to start the Second Age. I'm guessing the Second Age is going to be at least a couple of episodes.
Yeah.
But I will get this outline up this week for the patrons. We got a lot of exciting news on the Iconic Patreon, some developments that are going to be going live in March. We're going to add in monthly hangouts with for our upper tiers and maybe quarterly games once again. And Bob and I are giving away our new project, the Barebone Adventures, to all Iconic patrons. And of course, you get access to the Discord, which is where we get to hang out and talk about all these things. And to Haley and Chris and Becca and Dream Shaper, thank you so much for just coming and hanging out and joining us. Like, love having you in the chat. Looking forward to interacting with all of the fans who, just continually comment on the Exploring Glorantha show. And we're back, baby. Barring any other incidents going forward. Also, just a heads up, I'll put this in the announcement to the patrons, but also we're way behind on getting our next recording for the actual play, 13th Age 2 actual play. Part of that's because there have been just a lot of sicknesses, and Rob is working furiously to try and get the next 13th Age 2 play test packet. So we're hopeful in March that we're going to be able to blitz out a couple of, get our recording session in and then blitz out a couple of more episodes. So, well, Evan, as always, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. This is Exploring Glorantha, and we'll see you all next month.